who's basically my DevOps lead here in Indonesia. I would like to introduce him to everyone here. If you have questions about Azure and Azure DevOps, Maka is the person to speak with. I am a little less technical than Maka on some of the DevOps topics, so he's the great one to contact. Maka will be joining me later from behind the curtain, doing a little demo halfway through, and then he'll be coming back on stage when we go through some Q&A. Thank you, Maka. Okay, so I was standing up here earlier and I said, what's this red button for? Have they pressed this red button yet? Yeah? You guys all know? Because I was like, oh, okay, this is just, so I guess because it's after lunch, if you guys start falling asleep, I'm just going to press that button. All right? So be careful. All right, yeah, sorry. That's why Maka is the most important member of my team, because he remembers things I forget. All right, so let's go ahead, and obviously the topic of this conversation is about the experience of Microsoft coming online with DevOps. You can imagine how transformational that journey has been for Microsoft, and how many long and laborious years to achieve that. And I really want to share some exciting information about it and how we did it. Some of this stuff you guys will say, hey, I already know that. You know, I apologize if it's stuff you already know. But I think there are some key principles in there that you can learn from, those 7 habits that we've picked up over the years. So, again, this is myself, Steve Shirkey. I sit in Singapore, but I cover Indonesia as well as emerging markets. And so I'm in here every other week, so certainly you can reach out to me. I can come and speak with you. I can come and speak to your boss if you need someone to basically argue your case for why DevOps is so transformational. And of course, I mentioned Maka as well is here in the local office and is available. He can provide you with workshops and materials and other things that will help enable your DevOps journey if you haven't yet started. And even if you have started, there's actually a lot of interesting things that we can talk about. So, obviously, we want to start with a definition here. It's pretty typical here. We want to say that DevOps represents a union of people, processes, and tools to enable that continuous delivery of value to the customer, right? The key here is essentially trying to figure out a way to bring all of those pieces together to deliver the most value for the customer. So, just to simply make mention, there are many services inside of our Azure platform that provide you with the tools to do that, and they're essentially a mix and match. It's an a la carte kind of choice in terms of being able to use some of these pieces. And I'm going to have Maka come and demo a bit of that as well to show what these pieces are, but you can imagine this looks pretty common. You have repos, you have to have your software stored somewhere. You have pipelines, which represent the build process. You have things like boards to represent user stories and connect features to outcome. You have things like test plans and artifacts. So of course, many of this stuff you already know about, and I just wanted to introduce why we have solutions and what those solutions can do. So Azure DevOps is actually representing all of those tools, is used not just by our customers, but it's used internally by Microsoft. So when you think of how Windows today is built, you've heard about the Windows 10 newest release, that is built using Azure DevOps. So the same tools that we offer on our Azure platform are tools that we ourselves are consuming. So they say drink your own champagne, that's the polite way of saying it, and we do. So when we talk about that, look at the numbers in terms of DevOps at scale. You can imagine building Windows, building those kind of things, they take a long time. So you have obviously some interesting data points. The services offer or does 4.4 million builds per month. So obviously very robust and very much built for scaling. 78,000 deployments per day. So it's a significant amount of work that gets done using these platforms. You can imagine we've taken a long journey since this. In fact, there's probably people in this room that weren't even born when this thing was produced. That would be my guess. So obviously, moving from a traditional software manufacturer, the largest software manufacturer in the world, it was a challenge moving from a boxed world where deliveries were often 2 or 3 year cycles and it was all waterfall, and it was all very easily managed. What customer? You didn't care about the customer. You deliver the box. Deliver the box, that's the goal. Nobody cares about the customer. And you know that journey has obviously changed a lot, and it's changed the company a lot. And I want to talk about some of those things that have changed. So when we think about the habits, the 7 habits of Microsoft around DevOps, these are some of the key areas. I'm going to walk you through each one of those 7. So the first is about transformational organizations, right? So we have this tool called Azure DevOps. Well, we just solved for DevOps. We have a tool. That's all we need, right? And obviously there's a joke that went on the internet saying, yeah, it's great. Now all we have to do is just buy DevOps because it's available. It's right now. I can go and buy it from Microsoft, and I don't have to worry about organization or culture change or anything like that. It's very simple now, right? And obviously that is only one part of the overall story. Now, when we think about, this was a drawing done in 2011. They talked about the different org structures of major companies around the world. And you can see, if we zoom up on Microsoft in particular, you'll notice an interesting org structure there that favored weapons-based negotiations between different parts of the org. So obviously that's a bit absurd, but I think it speaks to the fact that there's a lot of kingdoms and fiefdoms inside Microsoft. Each one of those represented probably a different box product, and each one was basically at war with each other. And they're so busy at war with each other, they forgot who the customer is. I speak as a customer of Microsoft for 20 years, and I know that this pretty much represents what it was. That was in 2011. Now, how many people know this gentleman? Raise your hands. I hope a few people. So that's our CEO, Satya Nadella. He has a great hairline like me, so very handsome gentleman. But one of the key things that he did when he first took ownership, of Microsoft, the first thing he did was he started looking and analyzing the operation. So imagine you are the largest software company in the world. How do you do software? So he's like, wait, this is absurd. We have many different ways of doing the builds, many different ways of basically tracking the progress, understanding the features. He said, we need this to be consolidated and standardized. And of course, they all looked around and said, well, how are we going to do that? And the first thing they identified was, don't we create a product for that called Visual Server Team Services? Yes, we do. No one was using it. So now it was like, okay, then we need to actually focus our engineering effort on the area that we need most to maximize ourselves. We are a software organization. We need to focus on how we do our development. So he assigned all the best engineers to that. And the other thing that Satya did was absolutely surprising to the entire industry was he said, we love open source. Not we like open source, we're interested in open source, maybe we might want to date open source. He said we love open source, right? I'm sure that was a very big surprise to 99% of the people that worked at Microsoft that day. But that was basically the message that came down from Satya. And in embracing Linux, embracing open source, the organization basically committed to changing itself. And so the next part of the formula for how to engage in DevOps is that you have to have a growth-minded culture. So the first question is, how do you define growth? Are we talking about financial? Are we talking about market share? Are we talking about professional development? We don't know, right? But if you look back at Microsoft's history, in 1980, our mission statement was a computer on every desk and in every home. It was an ambitious vision in 1980s, which now has obviously grown to be almost blasé or in the past, right? But that was a message about growth, and it was probably more about a message of growing Bill Gates' wallet than anything else, right? And it certainly did achieve that. But the key was that these guys basically had that set as their definition of growth. Now, once again, looking at the modern Microsoft, you have Satya Nadella saying that our mission statement is to empower every person in every organization on the planet to achieve more. That is the mission. So where do you start with that? How do you do that? Well, obviously, if you're a company of 100,000 plus people, you need to start by understanding that we change our organization by changing ourselves. And one of the key parts of that was about our mindset. And of course, you could say this is basically, self-help guru books, but the idea is that there's a meaningful message inside of this book, Mindset, which Satya cited as the book that changed his mind about how he was going to operate Microsoft. And one key aspect inside Mindset is that we are of two different types. We are either a fixed mindset. When we look at something, it's never changing. We assume it will never get better, it may never get worse, but we don't see things changing. And we all know that's not true if we think about it, right? Everything's changing. Everything's always in change and always in flux. So if you don't achieve a growth mindset, then you don't look at people differently. You don't look at their potential. You don't look at what they can achieve. And if you don't look at what they can achieve, then you might as well get rid of them and try to find another person that suits your desire for a particular type of person. But Satya said, I want to look at my organization, even if they're coming from this box software world, I want to look at them as something new. And he challenged his own people to change. And if you are undergoing a DevOps transformation yourself, if you work for a large company, you have to get the organization to first commit to that transformation, and second, to have a growth mindset. So the next thing seems pretty obvious to everybody in this audience, I'm sure, but to be customer focused, right? Because we're really talking about listening to the customer and their outcomes. We have multiple different ways that we do that. We have a number of different mechanisms through user voice, through Stack Overflow, through other forums to be able to commit to connecting with the customer. If you aren't meeting customers every day, you're meaningless to them, right? You don't understand them, you don't know what they want. What are you building it for, right? If you don't understand those customers better than they understand themselves, then you're probably building the wrong product. Or maybe you're selling to the wrong market. And so the key here was that we also wanted to measure our effectiveness in doing that. And so you think about some of those metrics, the key is what matters to you. It may be about user retention, it may be about how quickly are you building your software, it may be what is the live site performance characteristics. All of these things are meaningful. Often though, that the measures we used in the past, and this is a part of Microsoft culture, was around lines of code. Right? So I'm doing better if I have more lines of code. It's quite crazy to think backwards now and imagine how that was ever used as a philosophy, because you would think the more lines of code, the more there's maintenance and bugs and things like that related to the code. So you're actually rewarding people on the wrong metrics. So all that stuff didn't matter. We focused on the other aspects. It's all about customer focus, performance metrics, how was the customer engaged. Finally, we have to be very transparent. When there are problems, you need to communicate. So the key is being customer focused. It includes the fact that sometimes you have to have hard conversations, both internally and externally, in order to be very admitting of failures and faults so that you can best address them. And honesty and earning trust is really a key foundation element to obtaining better market, better customer experience. So, production first mindset. Production is not a phase. Production is a feature. It has to be baked in with the concept you'll be delivering that into production. And so, of course, we have to define what that looks like. And of course, we're starting at the end, identifying what we want it to look like in production, what are the requirements, and then working backwards from that, developing hypothesis and determining whether we are correct about what the customer wants. When we look at how we operate our live site, how do we operate in production, that ops part, then what you see is actually there's a combination of individuals. So you have engineering team. That engineering team represents developers as well as the quality. They basically are one role. And those individuals are responsible within that small Scrum team for a single feature. They are responsible for not only coding it, but delivering it into production. They are very connected to outcomes. And why is that? You'll note it says available 5 minutes during work and 15 minutes outside of core hours. It's a rotating thing, so it's not like everyone is required 24 hours a day. But the idea is that if I'm on a Scrum team and we're delivering code, if I'm not doing a good job, I will hear from my 10 other members about the fact that they had to answer a call over the weekend because of my code. So the idea is connecting the outcome back to the people doing that original development. So we also have automating those production flows. It has to be done automatically, right? I mean, this is such a basic 101, but it's worth repeating. Many people will put up with manual steps as part of their development process or part of the automated deployment, that they would have a few extra, just let me do a little bit before it goes live, and those steps are going to kill you, right? Because that slows down your ability to deploy that code into production. So the other thing is obviously control that output, right? Make sure that you're not blowing things up. Put blast radius controls in. Make sure that you're not going to impact customers. So there's 5 rings at Microsoft for how we deploy Visual Services, Visual Studio Team Services. And that is always going to follow this process where it goes out each ring, making sure that we have health checks at each level. So I want to switch over here, and I'm going to have Maka do a quick demo to show you some of the tools that I've been mentioning.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Hi guys, you cannot see me, but...
Yeah, he's hiding back there. Very strange, very strange. How can you trust a man who's
such an impactful presentation, right? So I just want to show you guys 2 URL. The first one is this, dev.azure.com. So this is basically the Azure DevOps itself. And I want to just show you around with the Azure DevOps. So if you saw the slide that Steve gave before, we have boards. Azure boards is like Kanban boards. If you read the Phoenix project, this is the project parts unlimited that we created in the Azure DevOps. So in this Kanban boards, you can like assign tasks, assign like debug things, and all of the tasks that can be distributed to the teams. And you can see the backlogs, the sprints, and also there's also the repo here. We have Azure repos. This is the default one, but you can also use GitHub, GitLab, any repos that you have existing. Like Steve said, Microsoft or Azure is now open, so we can also use and utilize any open source tools that you already have, repos that you already have. You can see the commits, you can see the branch, pushes, and pull requests. And the main thing of the Azure DevOps is actually in here, in pipelines. So whenever you have source code, like in here, in the cloud, Azure repos, or probably you have some codes in your laptop or in your on-premise infrastructure, you can just push it to the Azure DevOps, and then it will be automatically built. For instance, this is the project I already built before. The summary of the pipelines is, so it's like this. Your team commits some changes, and because I just add this project, I manually queue it. Usually you have just automatically built, and then it will push to the pipeline, and so that's automatic testing, code coverage, and then after the build succeeds, it will have some artifacts. And then it goes to the deployment, to the CD, the continuous deployment. So the CI/CD itself is this in Azure pipeline. So if you see the releases, let me see. Okay. You can deploy it into stages like this. I have three different environment, dev, QA, and production. So each stage you can deploy it in, for example, dev you deploy it on Azure VM or Azure App Services. QA you deploy it on-premise. And production, maybe you can also deploy it on another cloud, Amazon, Google, or for instance. It's open. We're open. We're friends with everyone. Okay, that's the Azure DevOps in brief. And I want also to show you guys. This one is quite nice. Azure DevOps Labs. So this is a free resources for you to learn DevOps and specifically Azure DevOps. You can this is a hands-on lab. It has step-by-step instructions, so it's really easy and it's really instructional. So everything is free. And also, if you see my Azure DevOps back here, I already have all the things here. It looks nice, but tell you what, I'm not the one who created it. I have another Azure. Generator. So you can generate this. The code will generate the project and then it will populate your Azure DevOps. So you can maybe demo it to your customer or demo it to your CTO. I need to, for instance, just put it here. I choose the parts unlimited, the one from the books, and then just create a project. So it will be like this, parts unlimited demo, and there's also another template you can choose. So bear in mind again, dev.azure.com for the Azure DevOps itself, and the Azure DevOps Labs. There are two S here, and Azure DevOps Demo Generator.azurewebsites.net. It's a long one. Okay,
All right.
that's it.
Thank you so much, Maka. Thank you. Maka, thank you so much. Sorry, you would be on stage, but it was AV, can't have the cable running on here. Okay, so thank you, Maka. So continuing that journey in terms of the 7 habits that we experienced and we found were successful for us. So team autonomy and enterprise alignment. You know, this is really critical, is to try to provide individuals with meaningful work, right? Work is work, but if it's meaningful work, it really passes the time much faster and it really engages the individuals. And there's actually a great book on this topic called Drive by Daniel Pink. And in there he calls out the fact that you have to give teams 3 things. You have to give them autonomy, you have to give them mastery, and purpose. And so when we think about the typical, challenges as an organization, you just can't go out and build Windows with just good intentions and everyone running it and doing it their own way, right? So you have to figure out, how do you create a balance between the needs of the organization with the needs of those individuals? So what you often find is that the actual planning and the practice, in other words, the actual effort that goes into doing the work, those are pieces that you want to try to provide the team with the ability to decide on how they're doing it. And then the alignment at the master level. So for instance, at Microsoft we have 40 plus feature teams that are working for Visual Studio Team Services. That piece basically represents all the different pieces that you will see deployed around Visual Studio and Visual Studio Team Services. And of course, we have to have some kind of general idea and guiding force for that. But that autonomous nature is kept by those different feature teams. So I mentioned this a bit earlier, but the idea is that we took the traditional quality team and we merged that into the development team. And many of those people who were QA testers up to that point were okay with that change. Some found other roles. But the idea was that for most of those people, they basically became part of the full-fledged engineering team. And that engineering team was not only responsible for development, but also for checking their own code. And of course, you have the ops team, which sits as essentially the foundation layer, the site reliability engineers, the people who are responsible for keeping that infrastructure running, upon which you will be deploying those applications. And of course, you have program management as well represented. Those, I guess, are the people who keep order among all the chaos. And you actually see with the feature teams that we develop, we bring those people all together into a feature team, which then is interacting with those customers. So those people are very invested in the outcome of the customer, and they're getting that kind of feedback loop between those feature teams and the customers. What does a team look like at Microsoft? So we basically established a couple of ground rules. One is they need to have physical space. They all should be co-located together, right? The idea being that many studies have shown that you're most effective when you're actually working in the same room with the individual. When you do a stand-up, you do a stand-up. You get out of your chair and you stand together. So the idea is that you can't avoid me when I'm complaining about your part of the code is breaking my code. I will find you eventually at your desk. I know where you sit. And I think that's a really important message because I know that we have a lot of remote workers. We have the challenge of bringing everyone in the same room, but that's what we found successful. And bear in mind, these are just things that we found successful. Whatever your case may be, I'm not sure. But it seemed like it was much more effective as a physical space. That physical space could be very different. As I mentioned, there's more than 40 different teams. That feature team, it's a little bit bland looking, but it can actually be kind of crazy looking. And so those teams are cross-discipline, as mentioned earlier. You have the program management team sitting with the development team, the engineers, and those people are all together every day. And there's no more than 10 to 12 people. So the idea is that you kind of have a single-threaded feature team so that you don't have blockers for making decisions and be able to release that code. It's self-managing, so it's really essentially saying whatever the team decides is okay as long as it's in alignment with that overall organizational view. So there's clear charter and goals that are set. It's intact from anywhere to 12 to 18 months. And what's interesting is people vote themselves in and out of teams. They can choose to move to a different feature team if they find that it's just not clicking for them. And they often find, though, that teams will stay together. People will often stay together. 80% of the team members will stay with the team they're with. But it's the fact that they have the autonomy and the choice that allows them then to experience their fullest, whether it be doing something with a different feature team, different role. So the idea is encouraging that kind of creativity and engagement. So of course they own not just building the features, but deploying those into production. So the way this looks at Microsoft, again, this is specifically around Visual Studio Team Services, is that there's a scenario. This is actually fairly mapped to most of the product, but I just want to clarify. So the scenario is actually built, it's very high level, it's an epic, if you will. It's not going to be specific to any user stories, it's just going to say this is our general target, right? Within that, you have the concept of seasons. So you actually have 6-month seasons. This basically starts to get a little bit more granular in terms of what we're defining are the features that we're trying to deploy. We start moving into a plan stage. A plan is where the rubber hits the road, as they say. This is where the teams are essentially engaged in more detailed planning, and user stories would have been created around the next 3 sprints. And then, of course, the sprints themselves represent 3 weeks of work. At the end of the 3 weeks of work, that deliverable is pushed out to be pushed into an integration build. So the idea is that you have these different levels of granularity in terms of view. You have leadership. Leadership is responsible for driving that big picture. And I kind of think of it like this. It's kind of like anyone who has a child here has seen their child with a little Fisher-Price little wheel. They think they're driving the car. So that's where they think they're driving the car, right? Now below that are actually where the details are happening. That's when things are happening. And that's where the teams have control and input into that kind of planning stage. So how do we stay in sync, right? It's a real challenge. You have, first mechanism that we use is sprint mails. So the sprint mails essentially are provided by the program manager that sits with the team, and they'll be identifying as the first part of this is the sprint plan. This is what we're going to develop in the next 3 weeks. This is our target. Now at the end of those 3 weeks, you'll see this little slash indicating that work should be closing down. You should actually have a deliverable you can see and look at, and that's where actually they'll send out an email of what we've accomplished. And that actually includes a screen cam capture of what the feature looks like. So essentially, that product owner is speaking to what's been delivered in that 3-week sprint. So this becomes a forcing function that you stop at 3 weeks. You have to have a video of what you've delivered, not a Photoshop rendering of something similar to what you want to deliver. And so it becomes a real forcing point. And then the next thing is that you do deployment. So 2 people will be pulled out of that team and reduced on their next. So the sprints keep going, right? So that effort will continue as you see Sprint 99 is already starting during the deployment phase. And the deployment itself would be handled by 2 team members, and they'll reduce their workload and have them focused on any kind of issues, break fix, how do we do the integration, if there's challenges. So those people will continue with it. That team is responsible for that final build. And sprint email will often, again, just doing a recap and showing you information about what was achieved. You can see there's actually an embedding there in terms of the summary of the issues as well as a video that people can play. And then that's a sprint plan on the right, indicating essentially how the team is identified, all the different goals are identified for that sprint. So, by the way, I mean, maybe 3 weeks works for you, maybe 2 weeks works for you, 4 weeks, maybe a year, I don't know. But the point here is that we found it successful as far as being just the right level of granularity. It's kind of the Goldilocks solution. It's not too small, it's not too big, it seems to work well for us. And of course that you have that video, and then actually you're linking back to our management tools so we can actually see all of this information as part of our historical record about that sprint and about that feature. The next thing is team chats. So the idea is that you would often have, of course, the stand-up. You have all these mechanisms that you typically find in Agile and Scrum. So the idea is that you're recapping that internally. But beyond that, there's also a poll of the members, the team leads that essentially come back and report in terms of what's happening, what technical debt is being basically gathered or taken on in favor of delivery quickly. So the idea is that you have this direct contract or communication between the top to the bottom and reporting in results. So experience reviews. So what happens is every year then there's kind of, again, a review with the customers themselves in terms of aligning again, and that becomes essentially part of that overall, overarching plan and goal for the product, for the feature. So it's just basically saying how many sprints do we think we'll take to execute on this vision, getting feedback from the customer. You know, obviously it's a very important mechanism for getting connection with the customer at a top line view. Not just feature A, feature B, but just understanding the overall product. So the next point, which I brought up a little bit earlier, was shifting left to quality. In other words, shifted upstream. So the idea is that you want to try to deal with any bugs as quickly as possible. You want to move fast, but you don't want to break things, right? As much as you can, you want to try to restrict that. So the idea is that you control that blast radius again, because you know you won't be guaranteed to land. And I mentioned the 5 rings that we experience internally. But I just want to mention a lot of the testing that happens at Microsoft around Visual Studio Team Services itself is focused around unit testing. So obviously, you have a lot of different options where you can do more integration tests, you can do UI testing, all this pieces. But we find that unit tests are the most effective mechanism for telling us where we're at health-wise. And the idea is that you will often find on the pull request, you will have, I think for VSTS, it's something like 70,000 different tests will be run and executed. and you'll do that in 5 minutes or something like that, and you get a failure rate of 1 out of 5, so 20% of the pull requests will fail. But that then helps you because later downstream, because of the adherence to testing practices, you're only losing 1 out of 100 of your integration build tests. So the idea is to push that upstream, get the quality metrics quick in front of the developers, make sure that you're fixing your errors as quickly as possible. And of course, having that all dashboarded and being able to monitor across all the features in order to be able to see, you can get through those 70,000 tests and that last one flows red, and you have to go back and look and see what's going on. And infrastructure is flexible resource. Obviously, we've moved mostly to cloud development today because of the value in terms of elastic capabilities to be able to do on-demand, to be able to match your supply with demand in terms of compute capacity. So infrastructure as a service is a big part of that. I just wanted to note that obviously we have 2 different products. We're still producing box software to some degree, right? There's no physical box anymore, but you are delivering an on-prem solution as well as a cloud-based solution. There's a limit to exactly how many updates you want to push to someone's server sitting on-prem that's considered 7x24 mission critical. So of course we really actually do this as essentially there's a shared abstraction layer for the software underneath the covers. And then it's able to do updates on a regular basis, but on a more immediate basis for the cloud-based solution. Okay, and just wanted to also call out, if you are interested in Azure DevOps and want to understand a little bit more about a particular problem you're running into, this is Donovan Brown, who represents our DevOps effort globally. And they actually monitor this Twitter hashtag. So if you do have a question about it, I hope you don't spam them. I hope you don't cause them to wake up in the middle of the night. But they are monitoring this. And so if you do have a question, certainly feel free to reach out. So it's kind of like a bat signal for you to be able to just throw up something and get some response from us. So yeah, it looks exactly like that, by the way. Yeah. And anyway, we have further resources that are available. I don't know if you guys have heard of YouTube. So there's obviously a lot of different ways of getting a lot of videos, but we have Azure DevOps pieces, so just keyword Azure DevOps. But you can see from our channel 9, which is our own kind of YouTube technical channel, that includes things like Azure Friday, Visual Studio Toolbox, and other pieces that focus on DevOps conversations. So at least even if you're not interested in using the tools, you'll learn a lot about how Microsoft does it and what we see from customers. So it's interesting to see in terms of approaches, and there may be something there for you. And Twitter, I mentioned, of course, there's a web address. It's very easy. Google it, right? Yeah. So the whole point is that I also want to mention, I forgot this note. So when we talked about earlier how you can launch Azure DevOps and how you can go in there, it's actually free for up to 5 people. So after 5, then you pay like $6 per user, per named user per month. So it's available for you to try out. If you have a small development team, it certainly seems reasonable. You can go out and actually launch that. If you are using GitHub, if you have a public GitHub, then any public GitHub, you have up to 10 concurrent pipelines. We own GitHub, right? So the idea is that you can actually do pipelining right from your GitHub repository, and if it's public, there's no charge for that, and it's, again, another service that you can leverage. Because I know you're out working really hard. I really super appreciate the fact that you guys took the time to come here today to hear what we had to say, and I'm sure I speak for everyone else who's hosting this. I really appreciate you guys being in this room, you ladies and gentlemen, ibu-ibu. And really, yeah, saya menghargai menghadir kamu, or kalian. I think it's right. Anyway, it's been a while since I spoke to English. Okay, so thank you very much. I think we're going to switch to Q&A, and I want to invite Maka back on stage.
Is there any question?
Yeah, any questions? Okay.
Thank you. I'm very impressed with the last point from your slide about seven habits. The last point is about infrastructure. I want to ask how important infrastructure to support adopting DevOps and make the team
question is how important is that last part about the infrastructure as code, or essentially defining the infrastructure? I would say incredibly important. I think that's one of the critical cornerstones. The reason why we even can talk today about DevOps, 90% of it is because of the ability to provision things so quickly now, right? Without those pieces, you wouldn't have anything you would still be just a developer and throw it over the wall. I think that the ease by which you can provision that stuff, it's awesome. And therefore, whatever your choices are, obviously, we love open source. We have many customers on Ansible, on Terraform, etc. Whatever your choice that you make, obviously, just find a tool set that's comfortable for you, and then just make sure that you're disciplined, right? It's just like some kind of karate film where you're training and just be very disciplined and then deliver that final piece of code in an automated fashion. I think that's the critical element, but yes, I think it's absolutely critical. We wouldn't be here today probably without the idea of provisioning of those resources. Yeah. You want to add anything to that, Mark?
Sometimes we need to, like I showed before, we need to deploy to the different environments, different stages. For instance, the first one is dev environment, and if we have this IAC, an infrastructure as code, we can just spin up another environment, the same one, the same exact one for another stage. So it really saves us some time and
Oh yeah, sorry, I mean, it's such an obvious point. That's a great point that Maka brought up. It's not just about the ability to deploy that, but you can deploy a complete copy of your website, and you're not really taking on a lot of costs because you only run it for a short period of time before you kill off the original, which was impossible to do before, right? So everything was like nail-biting when you were delivering code in production, like, I don't know if this is gonna work. If you feel like that today, then you're probably doing it wrong. You should actually have a fairly controlled mechanism for doing blue-green deployments or whatever fits your model, or maybe there's red, green, blue now. The point is that there's obviously a model by which you can ensure that you will have no failure in production, or no failure in production, knock on wood. But yeah, the idea is get it as close as possible to perfect, right? So, great point. Any other questions? No other questions. Oh, there's the hand back in the back of the room. You're going to make this guy run very far.
Yeah, hello. There's a nice question to all of you guys. Actually, I saw you mentioned in different terms. One is DevOps and one is SRE. What are the difference between those two guys?
So you can think of the SRE, you were saying the SRE, right? The question was about what's the difference between the engineer and the SRE. So I think the SRE is essentially your traditional ops guys, because as much as we want to call ourselves DevOps, there's probably nobody in this room that's actually racking the servers and doing some of the hardware core pieces, connecting the routers, doing all the hardware layer, right? So when we think about the hardware layer, the SREs are responsible for that, ensuring that there's essentially a bed in which you can land your product for hosting. So that's a very good point and a great question, and I think of it as this. Either you take on that responsibility of SRE, and you're buying all that equipment and you're doing all that piece, or you take advantage of any number of cloud providers, and they're baking in the SRE for you. There shouldn't be an SRE if you're doing cloud-based development, right? The SRE hopefully is the responsive cloud provider who's answering your calls if there's any issues, right? But that's a great question. I didn't call that out. Anything you want to add on that? Oh, another.
I have a question about planning. Like, so that you have a scenario, system, other thing on the screen. But how do you manage this with which methodology? Are you using design thinking? How do you keep tracking that? Are you using Scrum or Kanban?
Okay, so I think within those team levels, the feature teams themselves can make a decision around it. But I don't know for every feature team, but I know that this looks like a Scrum model to me in terms of they're doing stand-ups and they're doing those pieces. I don't know if those become test-driven development internal to the team in terms of how they're delivering and what kind of internal rules and regulations that they set for themselves. So I think the idea is that it should be flexible, right? It should be diverse and inclusive. Diverse and inclusive. So whatever the strategy is that that team has for delivering, but of course at the top level you do have to integrate, right? So integration then probably looks a lot like, to some degree, the traditional waterfall, except done faster. Because at some point, you're not getting quite to continuous integration. You're not quite getting continuous delivery. You're getting this basic 3-week plan and deliver at the end of that 3 weeks, not like they're delivering code. Now, of course, they should all be able to deliver code on any day. It should be ready to go. But the reality is probably you're talking about a 3-week time span in which you're delivering that code for integration. Did that answer your question, or? Okay. Oh, you're sure? Okay. There's no limit here. Take as many as you got.
So what happens if you have like a big problem because you have different teams, and how do you integrate this team? Do you have like squads or maybe one person model inside your teams? Or for example, if you have a team in this team, you need to future with this team all in one project. If you don't have time to have more teams, could other team add more feature to this product or not?
So I'm not sure I'm not sure what the question here, but I will give you one shot and you tell me if I'm close. So obviously you don't have a fixed set of features. Things continue to change. You have these kind of challenges of how do you integrate in new features, how do you balance that in terms of deploying that. I just wanted to mention that one of the key points I dropped out of this slides, because I knew we didn't have a lot of time, was feature flags and the use of feature flags to indicate when you're bringing new things in terms of, we have a brand new feature, right? And now suddenly everybody needs some kind of button to click to go to Twitter or something. The idea is that you have feature flags that will control that deployment, so you essentially bake into your bits to be able to do a switch that at an individual user I can turn on or off those features. I can basically control for that, and then that becomes technical debt that you have to then back out later because you have all this internal switching happening, so then it becomes a bit of a surgical activity to then remove those pieces, but the idea is that it's one code base that you're delivering to production, but it may take many forms, right? So it's essentially able to deal with the idea of new features, advanced features, maybe you don't know it's quite ready, it's kind of a beta flag, and so we use feature flags in terms of controlling how those features come live inside of them, if that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? We're at time. Oh, one more. Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah. Related with the psychology engineering. So, within Microsoft, do you still have the traditional infrastructure operations team?
Do we still have the traditional what kind of team? Sorry.
Infrastructure operations team. I mean, like the server team, the storage team, network team.
Yeah, I believe everything is represented because there would be such specialized engineering tasks for the site itself, for Azure, for supporting those pieces. Actually, maybe Maka would be familiar in terms of our internal engineering teams around what we provide on the Azure side. And obviously, we host some things on Azure. I don't know if we still have internal hosting for different things.
It's we still have those groups, those engineers, but it's internal to us. So from the customer's point of view, it's all transparent because it's in the cloud, right? But we still manage and we still maintain the exact hardware infrastructure at the center itself.
So you still have traditional teams that are essentially dealing with networking issues, server issues, hardware-based issues, different types of hardware from routing to whatever, to storage.
Okay. In that case, how is the task separation between the SREs and those teams?
Between the
SREs and the traditional infrastructure team.
So like the site reliability engineers, is that what you mean? Oh, okay. So the SREs. So I honestly don't know in terms of how those teams engage each other. That's a good question. I apologize, I don't have an answer in terms of how the SREs engage with the particular specialist. My guess would be that those specialists are required in terms of any architecture decisions about storage solutions. I'll take storage as just one silo, right? And that the SRE maps across multiple different silos of technology. So the SRE probably is considered the person who is your third layer of support, your third level support, and the person who essentially is ensuring that the underlying storage mechanisms are working with the other pieces in terms of networking, in terms of the hardware. So I don't have an answer for you, but I guess if you want to give me your card, we can try to find out for you. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Steve Shirkey, for
Thank you.
the presentation.
Terima kasih banyak.
Applause for Steve. Oh, actually, that works now.
Yes,
Sorry,
yes,
it didn't work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Steve Shirkey. I work for Microsoft as a technical sales manager. I cover Indonesia, Malaysia, and emerging markets.
Okay, I will give you 3 questions.
Mhm.
The first one is, can you tell us a little bit about your presentation before?
So my presentation was targeted at discussing the history of Microsoft and the transformational aspect of doing DevOps. It's obviously not just a technology problem, it's a people problem, it's a culture problem. And for a company that had been so successful at doing software development, it was a real challenge for us to make a change to adopt these patterns and these practices. And I think that if anyone can do it, if Microsoft can do it, anyone can do it. The idea is that what we've experienced in terms of changing our corporate culture, in terms of developing those tools, those are all things that anyone can do. And actually we provide those tools as well to our customers. So it's quite exciting to be able to meet with customers today and hear questions from them and be able to introduce them a bit about Azure and some Azure DevOps story.
Okay. So how are you feeling about participate in DevOps today?
I definitely am excited about DevOps, but I'm even more excited about Indonesia. And I'm excited about the growth of the market and the number of unicorns coming out of Indonesia and all the DevOps story that's happening here. So it's quite exciting for me to be able to come and visit. I get down here as often as I can to meet with different customers of Microsoft.
Okay. Last question, can you give us the feedback or maybe something that we can improve for next year?
So improving, I think it's been wonderful. I appreciate the catering, I appreciate the personal greeting at the door, I appreciate all the support. I think everything's been wonderful. So from the setup to the equipment to the people, I've really enjoyed my time here.
Okay,
Yes.
maybe one word that describe DevOps Jakarta 2019.
I think innovative. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.